The metal crate landed with a heavy thud as Jiwoo set it down in the armory. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the ship's climate control. He wiped it away with the back of his hand and checked his datapad. 40 more crates to move before his shift ended. The work was simple, mindless, exactly what he needed. "Watch where you're going, human," a Vexari soldier sneered as Jiwoo maneuvered another crate through the narrow corridor. The alien's blue skin gleamed under the overhead lights, his forearms crossed in obvious disdain. Jiwoo lowered his head and stepped aside, letting the superior officer pass without a word. This was his life now aboard the Eternal Vigilance. He wore the uniform of a corporal, but everyone treated him like he was invisible. A delivery man, a warehouse worker in military clothing. Nothing more. And that suited him just fine. The ship hummed around him as he worked. A massive vessel carrying representatives from 12 different species. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Coalition, and most aliens still saw them as weak, too soft, too fragile. Good for technical work and logistics, but not real warriors. Jiwoo had heard it all before. He never argued, never defended himself. He just moved his crates and kept his mouth shut. In the mess hall later that evening, Jiwoo sat alone with his tray of synth protein and vegetables. The food tasted like cardboard, but he ate it mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Across the room, a group of human pilots laughed loudly, celebrating something. Lieutenant Dae-hyun stood at the center, his chest covered in medals, his smile bright and confident. "Hey, supply guy," Dae-hyun called out, his voice carrying across the mess hall. "When are you going to get us those new targeting systems? Or is counting boxes too complicated?" The other pilots laughed. Jiwoo looked up briefly, his face expressionless, then returned to his food. He chewed slowly, swallowed, took another bite. The laughter eventually died down and they forgot about him again. They always did. "Don't mind them," a voice said. Commander Mira slid into the seat across from him, her own tray in hand. She was one of the few who treated him like a person. Jiwoo nodded but said nothing. Mira studied him for a moment, her dark eyes curious. She had tried many times to draw him into conversation, but he never gave her much to work with. "You know, I looked at your service record today," she said casually, taking a bite of her food. "Most of it is pretty standard. Supply chain management, logistics coordination, inventory systems. But there are gaps. Big ones. Whole years just blacked out." Jiwoo's hand paused for just a fraction of a second before he continued eating. "Personnel error, probably," he said quietly. "Happens sometimes." Mira didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. She had learned not to push him. Some people had pasts they didn't want to talk about. And in the military, you learn to respect that. The alarm shattered the quiet evening like broken glass. Red lights flashed throughout the ship, and the intercom crackled to life. "All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat. This is not a drill." Jiwoo stood immediately, his body moving on instinct. Around him, soldiers scrambled toward their posts. Mira was already running toward the bridge. Her food, forgotten. Jiwoo headed toward the cargo bay, his assigned station during emergencies. He would secure the supplies and make sure nothing shifted if the ship had to maneuver. On the bridge, Captain Velrin stood at the center of controlled chaos. His species, the Vexari, were known as excellent strategists and natural leaders. His scaled face showed concern as he reviewed the incoming data. "Report," he commanded. "Distress signal from mining colony Theta 7, sir," an officer replied. "Vrath raiders. At least 3 attack ships. The colony's defenses are down. They're calling for immediate assistance." Velrin's eyes narrowed. The Vrath were brutal warriors, known for taking slaves and resources from weaker settlements. "How many civilians?" 3. 19. 230, sir. Mostly miners and their families. "Prep the strike team," Velrin ordered. "We move in 10 minutes. Mira stepped forward. "Sir, The Vrath don't usually attack coalition-protected colonies. This could be a test of our response time. Then we'll show them we don't hesitate, Velrin replied. He turned to address the room. I want our best on this. Daehyun, you'll lead the air support. Lieutenant Kresh, take your ground team. Standard rescue protocol. Get in. Secure the civilians. Eliminate the threat. The strike team assembled quickly in the hangar bay. They were the elite, the best warriors from various species, heavily armed and trained for exactly this kind of mission. They boarded their assault transport with professional efficiency. Jiwoo watched from the cargo bay entrance, his face shadowed. He counted the soldiers as they loaded up. 32. Against an unknown number of Wrath Raiders, the transport's engines roared to life, and it launched into the black void of space, streaking toward the distant colony. Back on the bridge, Mira pulled up personnel files on her private terminal. Something had been nagging at her since dinner. She navigated through Jiwoo's record again, focusing on those blacked-out sections. Her security clearance wasn't high enough to access the details, but she could see the classification level. Her breath caught. The sections were marked Classified, Special Operations Command, Eyes Only. Below that, partially visible through layers of redaction, she could make out fragments of text. Ghost Company, High-Value Targets, Survival Rate, Psychological Evaluation, Required. And there, almost hidden in the digital noise, a single word that made her blood run cold. Reaper. She looked up, staring through the viewport at the distant stars. In the cargo bay several decks below, Jiwoo continued his inventory check. His face calm, his movements steady. Just another quiet day for the supply corporal that everyone overlooked. But Mira's hands trembled slightly as she closed the file. Who exactly was Han Jiwoo? The screaming started exactly 43 minutes after the strike team entered Colony Theta 7. The communications officer on the Eternal Vigilance went pale as the audio feed erupted with gunfire and panicked voices. Ambush. It's an ambush. They were waiting for. The transmission cut to static. Captain Velrin gripped the arms of his command chair. Get me a visual. What's happening down there? The main screen flickered to life, showing helmet camera feeds from the surviving team members. What they saw made even the veteran Vexari warriors on the bridge step back. Bodies littered the landing zone. The transport was a burning wreck, torn apart by heavy weapons that should not have been on a simple raiding vessel. This wasn't a raid. It was a trap. Fall back! Fall back! Lieutenant Kresh shouted over the comms. But there was nowhere to fall back to. Vrath soldiers poured from every corridor, their superior numbers overwhelming the coalition team in seconds. Daehyun's fighter screamed overhead, trying to provide cover, but ground-based missiles forced him to pull away. Within minutes, it was over. 15 coalition soldiers dead, 17 captured, including Captain Velrin, who had joined the assault personally. The Vexari captain knelt in the colony's main plaza, hands bound, a Vrath blade pressed against his throat. The transmission that came through next was from the Vrath commander. His face filled the screen, reptilian and cruel, his teeth filed to sharp points. Coalition vessel. I am Chieftain Gralmoth. Your warriors are now my prisoners. You have 1 hour to retreat beyond the neutral zone, or I begin executing them. 1 every 10 minutes. Starting with your captain. The bridge of the Eternal Vigilance fell silent. With Velrin captured, command fell to Mira. She stood frozen, her mind racing through impossible calculations. They couldn't mount another assault in time. They couldn't leave their people to die. There was no good option. Commander? An officer asked quietly. Your orders? Mira opened her mouth, but no words came. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Jiwoo, standing at the bridge entrance. He still wore his supply corps uniform, but something about him had changed. His eyes were no longer downcast. I volunteer to go, he said simply. Corporal, this isn't, Mira began. Commander, Check my file again. The classified sections. You have emergency override codes. Use them. Mira hesitated, then typed rapidly on her console. Her command codes unlocked layers of security she didn't even know existed. Text flooded the screen. Mission reports. Evaluation summaries. A list of operations that read like a nightmare. Operation Crimson Echo. Solo infiltration of enemy command center. 17 confirmed eliminations. Target rescued. Operative suffered severe psychological trauma. Operation Silent Dawn. Behind enemy lines for 43 days. Zero support. Sabotaged enemy supply lines. 42. Confirmed eliminations. Operative recommended for discharge due to dissociative episodes. The list went on. And on. Psychological profile excerpt. Subject demonstrates extreme compartmentalization. In combat scenarios, exhibits near total emotional detachment. Kill count efficiency rated at 97.3%, highest in Ghost Company history. However, subject shows signs of identity fragmentation. Recommend immediate discharge and mandatory counseling. Subject too effective at killing. Has forgotten how to be anything else. Mira looked up at Jiwoo with new eyes. He stood calmly, waiting. The quiet supply corporal was gone. In his place stood something else. Something cold and patient, and absolutely terrifying in its stillness. "You're Reaper," she whispered. "I was." He corrected. "I don't want to be that person anymore. But right now, our people need him." Mira made her decision in seconds. "What do you need?" "A supply shuttle. Small, unremarkable. And access to storage locker Delta 7. That locker has been sealed since you came aboard. It requires your biometric signature to open." "I know." 20 minutes later, Jiwoo stood in the armory section that few people ever visited. The locker was plain gray metal. No different from 100 others. But when he pressed his hand against the scanner, it recognized him immediately. The lock disengaged, with a heavy click. Inside was equipment he had hoped never to touch again. A combat suit. Black as space. Designed for stealth and efficiency. Weapons that had no place in standard military loadouts. A knife, old and worn, its handle carved with 47 notches. One for each successful solo extraction. One for each time Reaper had walked into hell and brought someone back alive. He dressed slowly, each piece of equipment sliding into place like muscle memory. The suit molded to his body. The weapons found their homes on his belt and thighs. The knife went into its sheath on his chest, close to his heart. When he looked at his reflection in the locker's interior mirror, Han Ji-woo was gone. Reaper stared back. Mira found him in the shuttle bay. She almost didn't recognize him. "The Vrath have 50 to 60 soldiers down there. You'll be alone. I've had worse odds," he said, his voice flat and emotionless now. "Jiwoo." She started, then stopped. What could she say? Good luck? Be safe? Those words seemed meaningless looking at him now. "When this is over," Jiwoo said quietly, "I go back to the cargo bay. Back to counting crates. That's the deal. I'm not Reaper anymore. I'm just Jiwoo, who wants a quiet life." "Agreed," Mira said. "Bring them home." The shuttle launched without fanfare, a small speck heading toward the colony. On the bridge, the crew watched it go. They had no idea what they had just unleashed on the Vrath. In the colony, Growlmoth laughed as he saw the tiny shuttle approach on his sensors. His lieutenant studied the readings. Only one life sign, Chieftain. A human. One human? Growlmoth's laughter grew louder. They insult us with this weakness. Shoot it down and execute 2 prisoners instead of 1. They need to learn respect. But before his gunners could fire, the shuttle's transponder broadcast a single message. Not words, just a file, a service record. When Growlmoth's computer translated it and displayed the name attached, his laughter died in his throat. "Reaper. What is a Reaper?" his lieutenant asked. Growlmoth didn't answer. He was too busy watching the shuttle land in an unmonitored section of the colony. Too busy remembering rumors he'd heard from other Vrath commanders. Whispers about a human ghost that hunted in the dark. Stories he'd dismissed as coalition propaganda. Maybe they weren't just stories. In the shuttle, Jiwoo sat in complete silence for a moment. Then he picked up his knife, checked his weapons one final time, and opened the hatch. The colony's dark corridors stretched before him like welcoming arms. Reaper had come home. The first Vrath patrol never saw him coming. 4 soldiers walking the outer perimeter, their weapons relaxed, confident in their numbers. They joked about how easy the ambush had been, how weak the coalition warriors looked when captured. Then, the lights in their section went dark. Power failure, one said, activating his helmet light. Third one today. This colony is falling apart. He turned to tell his squad to report it. His 3 companions were gone. Just empty corridor behind him. Funny. Real funny. Where did you... The blade entered his throat before he could finish. He didn't even have time to gurgle. Jiwoo lowered the body silently to the floor and dragged it into a maintenance shaft with the others. 4 down. 56 to go. In the colony's command center, Growlmoth stared at his tactical display. One of his patrol teams had stopped moving. Patrol 7. Report. Static. Patrol 7. Respond immediately. More static. Growlmoth's eyes narrowed. He sent another team to investigate. They found the corridor empty except for 4 helmets arranged in a neat row. No bodies. No blood. Just helmets. And on the wall behind them, scratched into the metal with something sharp, a single word in Vexari script. Soon. Lock down all sections, Growlmoth ordered. No one travels alone. Teams of 6, minimum. And find that human. But finding Jiwoo was like trying to catch smoke. He moved through the colony's ventilation systems, through maintenance tunnels built for machines, not people, through spaces so tight he had to exhale completely just to squeeze through. He was everywhere and nowhere. Another team died in the water processing plant, found floating face down in the recycling tanks. Another team vanished in the power generation sector. Their weapons neatly stacked by the door, but their bodies nowhere to be found. Every death was silent. Every attack came from unexpected angles. The Vrath soldiers began to panic. It's not possible, one Vrath warrior hissed to his companion. One human can't do this. It's not possible. Spread out, his squad leader ordered. Check every corner, he's just one. The ceiling panel above them crashed down. Jiwoo dropped into their midst, like death itself. His knife flashed in the emergency lighting. 1, 2, 3. Vrath fell before they could raise their weapons. The squad leader managed to fire his rifle, but Jiwoo wasn't there anymore. He'd rolled behind cover, and now the squad leader stood alone, his team dead around him. What are you? The Vrath gasped, raising his weapon with shaking hands. Jiwoo tilted his head, studying the alien like a scientist examining an insect. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. His eyes said everything. They were empty, cold, completely without mercy or hesitation. The squad leader turned to run, and made it 3 steps before the blade found his spine. In the medical bay on the colony's lower level, Private Salmon huddled with 23 terrified colonists. They'd barricaded themselves in when the attack started. Too scared to move. Now they listened to the chaos above them. Gunfire. Screams. Then silence. Always that terrible silence. Something's happening, whispered one colonist, an old miner with metal dust in his beard. The Vrath are scared. I can hear it in their voices over the intercom. Scared of what? Salmon asked. There's only one person who came from the ship. The Vrath have dozens of soldiers. Had dozens, the miner corrected, pointing at the security monitor. They could see Vrath warriors running through corridors, firing at shadows, jumping at every sound. These weren't the confident conquerors from an hour ago. These were prey, being hunted. The door to the medical bay opened so quietly that Salmon almost didn't notice. She spun, raising a medical laser scalpel as a weapon. A figure in black stood in the doorway, backlit by emergency lights. For a moment, she thought it was a Vrath in strange armor. Then she saw his face, human, young, Asian features. But his eyes were all wrong. They looked through her, rather than at her, like she wasn't fully real to him. "Stay here," Jiwoo said quietly. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but completely empty of emotion. "Barricade the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone except coalition forces. I've left supplies in the corridor outside. Food, water, medical kits. Who are you?" Salmon whispered. Jiwoo paused at the door. "It doesn't matter anymore." Then, he was gone, the door sliding shut behind him. Salmon and the colonists stared at each other. "Was that?" One started. "That was whoever's killing all the Vrath," the old miner said quietly. "And I'm grateful he's on our side. I'm grateful. There why be he's on our side. Rather well. One grateful. I'm grateful he's on our side. That was whoever's killing all the Vrath. There wabi he's on our side. There wabi he's on our side. There wabi he's on our side. There wa-" In the plaza where the prisoners were held, Captain Velrin and the others sat bound and guarded by 12 Vrath soldiers. They'd been there for 3 hours now, long enough to hear the chaos spreading through the colony, long enough to see their captors growing increasingly nervous. Daehyun, his face bruised and bloody, leaned close to Velrin. "Do you hear that? The gunfire's getting closer to us. But then it stops. Every time. It just stops." Velrin had noticed. He'd also noticed that Gralmoth's force had been 63 soldiers when they'd arrived. Now, according to the chatter he could overhear, less than 20 remained. One human was systematically destroying an entire Vrath raiding party. "Impossible," whispered a Vexari soldier next to him. "No warrior is that efficient." Not alone. The security monitor on the plaza wall flickered to life suddenly. Someone had accessed the colony's camera system. The feed showed a darkened corridor. 6 Vrath soldiers advanced carefully, their weapons raised, sweeping for threats. Then the lights went out. The camera switched to thermal imaging automatically. The Vrath showed as bright yellow figures in the darkness. Behind them, almost invisible even in thermal, a human-shaped shadow moved. It happened so fast that later, Velrin wouldn't be able to describe it properly. The shadow flowed between the Vrath, like water. Knife flashes. Bodies falling. 6 soldiers dead in maybe 10 seconds. The figure never fired a shot. Never made a sound that the camera's audio could pick up. When the lights came back on, only one figure stood in the corridor. He looked directly at the camera, directly at them. His face was expressionless, but his eyes, Velrin had seen many predators in his life. He'd fought in a dozen wars across 3 star systems. He'd never seen anything like those eyes. "It's not human," one of the Vrath guards whispered, his weapon shaking in his hands. "It can't be. It's like fighting a ghost." One guard managed to reach his communicator. "Chieftain, the human. We saw him on cameras. He's not. He doesn't fight like anything we've trained for. He's..." The transmission cut to static. On another monitor, they saw that guard's team. Saw the lights go dark. Saw thermal signatures disappearing one by one. Heard nothing but silence. Gralmoth's voice came over the intercom, trying to sound confident but failing. "All remaining units, fall back to the command center. We fortify there. We use the prisoners as shields. The human won't risk their lives." But Velrin looked at that emotionless face on the monitor and wondered if that was true. Would someone with eyes like that care about hostages? Or would he see them as acceptable losses in the pursuit of his mission? In the colony's communication room, now empty except for bodies, Jiwoo tapped into the main broadcast system. His fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease. He'd done this before. Many times before. The speakers throughout the colony crackled to life. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. But somehow, that made it more terrifying. Growlmoth, you have 5 minutes to release all prisoners and surrender. You're one human. Growlmoth shouted back over the speakers. I still have 18 warriors. We have your captain. We have hostages. Jiwoo's response was quiet, matter of fact, as if he was simply stating an obvious truth. You had 63 warriors 3 hours ago. Now you have 18. In 5 minutes, you'll have none. The transmission ended. Silence filled the colony. In the plaza, the Vrath guards looked at each other with barely concealed fear. Daehyun stared at the security monitor, where Jiwoo's face had been moments before. I made fun of him, Daehyun whispered. Velrin didn't answer. He was too busy watching the tactical display one of the guards had left visible. It showed the colony's layout, showed the remaining Vrath positions, and showed one signal moving through the colony toward the command center. One signal that moved like a shark through water. Smooth. Unstoppable. Inevitable. The 5 minutes were almost up. 5 minutes passed. Then 6. Then 7. Nothing happened. The Vrath guards in the plaza started to relax slightly, thinking maybe the human had been bluffing. Maybe he'd retreated. Maybe their chieftain's show of force with the hostages had worked. Then the colony's environmental systems shut down. The temperature began dropping immediately. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. And through the speakers came a sound that made the Vrath guards grip their weapons tighter. Footsteps, slow, steady, coming closer. He's playing with us, one guard hissed. In the command center, Growlmoth watched his tactical display with growing dread. His remaining forces were positioned at every entrance, heavily armed and ready. The hostages knelt in the center of the room, surrounded by guards. It should have been an impregnable position. The main door exploded inward. The blast wasn't large enough to hurt anyone, but it filled the room with smoke and noise. Vrath soldiers opened fire blindly into the haze, their weapons lighting up the darkness. Hundreds of rounds tore through the doorway, shredding everything in their path. "Cease fire!" Growlmoth shouted. The guns went silent. The smoke began to clear. The doorway was empty. No body. No blood. "Where?" a guard started to say. The ceiling panel directly above them crashed down. Jiwoo dropped into their midst like a stone, landing in a crouch. His knife was already moving before he hit the ground. 2 guards fell instantly. Their throats opened. He rolled under the wild gunfire from the others, came up behind a 3rd guard, used the Vrath's own body as a shield while he killed 2 more. The whole sequence took maybe 6 seconds. 5 guards dead. The prisoners scrambled away from the chaos, dragging each other toward the walls. Daehyun stared in absolute shock as Jiwoo moved through the remaining guards like death choreographed to music only he could hear. A Vrath warrior charged him with a blade. Jiwoo sidestepped, grabbed the warrior's arm, twisted it until bone broke, took the blade, and used it to kill 3 more guards in rapid succession. He moved without wasted motion. Every step served a purpose. Every action flowed into the next. "Shoot him!" Growlmoth screamed. "Everyone shoot him!" The remaining guards opened fire. Jiwoo was already moving, using the command center's equipment as cover. A console exploded where he'd been a second before. He came around its side, shot 2 guards with a pistol he'd taken from a dead Vrath, threw the knife across the room into a 3rd guard's chest, and then he was among them again. Close quarters, hand to hand. His area of expertise. The guards never stood a chance. Velrin watched it all with a mixture of horror and awe. This wasn't a soldier fighting. This was an artist at work. Every movement was precise. Every decision was instant. Jiwoo didn't hesitate, didn't second guess, didn't show mercy. He simply executed his task with terrifying efficiency. Within 2 minutes, only Growlmoth remained standing. The Vrath chieftain backed toward a wall, his weapon raised but his hands shaking. Around him lay his entire force, dead or dying. One human had done this. One. "You're not possible," Growlmoth said, his voice breaking. "The Vrath are the warriors, the conquerors. Humans are weak, soft. We studied your species. You break easily. You studied wrong." Jiwoo interrupted quietly. He walked toward Growlmoth slowly, deliberately. His suit was covered in blood, none of it his own. His knife dripped red, but his face remained completely calm. Growlmoth fired his weapon. The shot went wide, his aim ruined by fear. He fired again. Again. Each shot missing, as Jiwoo walked forward, like the bullets weren't there. Like he couldn't be stopped by something as simple as weapons. When Growlmoth's gun clicked empty, Jiwoo was right in front of him. The Vrath chieftain was larger, stronger, his species bred for combat. He swung his massive fist at Jiwoo's head with enough force to crush a human skull. Jiwoo caught the fist. Held it. Growlmoth stared in disbelief. A human shouldn't be able to stop that punch. Shouldn't be strong enough. But Jiwoo's training wasn't about strength. It was about leverage. About technique. About knowing exactly where and how to apply pressure. He twisted Growlmoth's arm, drove his knee into the Vrath's side, and took him to the ground. The fight lasted maybe 30 seconds. When it ended, Growlmoth lay on his back, Jiwoo's knee on his chest, the old worn knife pressed against his throat. "Please," Growlmoth gasped. "I surrender. By coalition law, you must accept You gave my people 5 minutes to surrender," Jiwoo said softly. "You said you'd execute them one by one. Where was coalition law then?" Velrin's voice cut through the tension. "Corporal, stand down." Jiwoo didn't move, didn't blink. The knife stayed exactly where it was, pressing just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Corporal Jiwoo," Velrin said more firmly, pushing himself to his feet, despite his bound hands. "I am ordering you to stand down. We take prisoners. That's what separates us from them." For a long moment, nobody breathed. Jiwoo stared down at Growlmoth with those empty eyes. The Vrath chieftain could see his own death reflected there. See how little his life meant to this human. How easy it would be for the knife to finish its work. Then something changed in Jiwoo's expression. A flicker of something. Pain, maybe. Or regret. The emptiness cracked slightly, and through that crack came a glimpse of the man buried underneath. He stood up, pulling the knife away. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. Growlmoth scrambled backward, gasping. Jiwoo turned away from him, moving to free the prisoners. His hands shook slightly as he cut through their bonds. Just a tremor, barely visible, but it was there. Daehyun approached cautiously once his hands were free. You saved us. I don't understand. How did you?" "I did what was necessary," Jiwoo replied, his voice flat again. "Professional. Nothing more." "That wasn't just necessary," Daehyun insisted. "That was. I've never seen anyone fight like that." "What are you?" Jiwoo didn't answer. He was already moving through the room, checking for any remaining threats, securing weapons, falling back into the role of a soldier completing his mission. But Daehyun noticed how Jiwoo avoided looking at the bodies, how his jaw clenched when he had to step over them. Velrin studied the human corporal carefully. The deadly efficiency had faded. Now Jiwoo just looked tired, worn, like the violence had cost him something, even if it hadn't left physical marks. "You were Ghost Company," Velrin said. "Not a question. A statement." Jiwoo paused in his work. "I was a lot of things once. Now I'm just a supply corporal who wants to count boxes and be left alone. After what we just witnessed?" Velrin shook his head. "That's unlikely. With respect, sir, I did what you ordered. I brought everyone home alive. Even him." Jiwoo gestured at Growlmoth without looking at the Vroth. The deal was, I go back to my regular duties after this. I intend to hold everyone to that deal. Before Velrin could respond, Somin arrived with the rescued colonists. She took one look at the command center, at the bodies, at Jiwoo standing in the middle of it all, and her professional medic training kicked in. You're hurt, she said, noticing blood on his arm. It's not mine, Jiwoo replied. Let me check anyway. She moved toward him, but he stepped back instinctively. I'm fine, Private. Check the others. The others are stable. You're the one who just fought 63 soldiers alone. She reached for his arm again. Wyke. Wyke. This time, when he stepped back, he bumped into the wall. Cornered. Somin saw the flash of panic in his eyes before he buried it. Saw how his hand moved toward his knife before he stopped himself. She understood then. The violence wasn't just something he could turn on and off. It was a part of him now. Always ready. Always close to the surface. It's okay, she said softly, holding up her hands. I'm just going to scan you. No touching. Okay? Jiwoo nodded stiffly. Let her scan him with her medical equipment. The readings showed elevated heart rate. Adrenaline levels through the roof. Stress hormones that should have made it impossible for him to even stand. But he stood there calmly, his breathing controlled, his face expressionless. How are you not collapsed? Somin wondered aloud. Training, Jiwoo said simply. But it was more than training. It was conditioning. It was years of turning himself into a weapon so sharp that he'd cut his own humanity in the process. And now that the weapon had been used again, put back into its proper context, he could feel the old patterns trying to reassert themselves, trying to pull Han Jiwoo back down into the darkness where only Reaper lived. He closed his eyes for a moment, fighting it, fighting himself. When he opened them again, he looked at Velrin. Permission to return to the ship, sir? Velrin wanted to say so many things. Thank you. I'm sorry. What did we make you? But he just nodded. Granted, Corporal. And, well done. Jiwoo saluted mechanically and walked toward the exit. He passed Daehyun, who looked at him with newfound respect and fear. Past the other rescued soldiers, who parted to let him through. Past the bodies of all the Vroth he'd killed, and with each step, he tried desperately to remember how to be Jiwoo again. Tried to put Reaper back in the locked room in his mind, where he belonged. But the door to that room felt harder to close this time. The shuttle ride back to the Eternal Vigilance felt longer than it actually was. Jiwoo sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the approaching ship. Behind him, in the cargo area, he'd secured Growlmoth and 2 other surviving Vrath soldiers. They hadn't spoken during the entire trip. They just stared at him with fear and something like reverence. When the shuttle docked, a medical team was waiting. Commander Mira stood at the front of the crowd, her face showing relief when she saw Captain Velrin walk out unharmed. The other rescued soldiers followed, then Somin with the colonists. Finally, Jiwoo emerged, carrying his gear. The hangar bay fell silent. Everyone stared at him. Not the way they had before, when he was invisible. Now they stared with awe, with fear, with curiosity. He hated every second of it. Corporal. Mira approached him carefully. The captain wants to see you for a debriefing. And then medical needs to. Company. I'm fine, Commander. Jiwoo interrupted quietly. I'll report for debriefing, but I'm not injured. Medical should focus on the others. Jiwoo, you just, with respect, sir, I'd like to debrief, submit my report, and return to my duties. As agreed, Mira saw the plea in his eyes. Saw how desperately he wanted to go back to being invisible again. She nodded slowly. After the debriefing, then yes, you can return to regular duties. The debriefing took 2 hours. Captain Velrin, Commander Mira, and 3 other senior officers listened as Jiwoo gave a clinical, detailed account of the mission. He described entry points, tactical decisions, threat assessments. He spoke about the deaths he'd caused the way someone might describe filing paperwork. Necessary actions taken to complete the objective. He never said how he felt about any of it. When he finished, Velrin sat back in his chair. The Vexari captain looked at Jiwoo for a long moment before speaking. I owe you an apology, Corporal, and I owe all humans an apology. I believed your species was weak. Support personnel at best. I was wrong. Spectacularly wrong. You weren't wrong, sir, Jiwoo said quietly. Most humans are exactly what you thought. Builders, creators. People who prefer peace. That's what makes us good. He paused, searching for words. I'm the exception. The broken piece. Don't judge my species by me. Broken? Velrin frowned. You just saved 17 lives against impossible odds. Because I'm good at killing, sir. That's not something to celebrate. It's something I was hoping to leave behind. Mira leaned forward. Why did you leave Ghost Company, Jiwoo? Your record shows you were their most effective operative. Jiwoo's jaw tightened, his hands, resting on his lap, clenched into fists. I left because I looked in a mirror one day and didn't recognize the person looking back. I'd become so good at being Reaper that I forgot how to be Han Jiwoo. Every mission made it worse. The compartmentalization they trained into me worked too well. I could turn off my emotions, turn on the killing instinct, complete the mission. But turning it off again got harder every time. And now? Mira asked gently. Now I've used it again. Let Reaper out. And he doesn't want to go back in the box. Jiwoo's voice cracked slightly. That's why I need to return to normal duties. Immediately. I need routine. Normalcy. I need to remember who I am before I forget again. Velrin exchanged glances with Mira. They both understood. This wasn't just a soldier wanting rest. This was a man fighting for his sanity. For his identity. You're reinstated to supply core duties, Corporal, Velrin said formally. With a commendation for valor, which you don't have to wear on your uniform if you don't want to. Is that acceptable? Velrin. 7. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Dismissed. Jiwoo stood, saluted, and left quickly. What did we do to him? One of them finally asked. What did his own people do to create something like that? Mira pulled up Jiwoo's psychological evaluations on her tablet. They took a good soldier and trained him to be perfect. Too perfect. The report from his last psychiatrist says it clearly. Subject has weaponized his own humanity. Can turn emotions on and off like a switch. But the switch is breaking. Recommend immediate discharge before subject loses ability to return to normal psychological state. And we just made him flip that switch again, Velrin said quietly. Because we needed him to. Nobody had an answer to that. In the cargo bay, Jiwoo changed back into his regular uniform. The combat suit went back into the locker. The weapons were cleaned and stored. The knife, that old worn knife with 47 notches, he stared at for a long time before putting it away. 48 notches now. He'd carved the new one during the shuttle ride back, his hands moving on autopilot. He sealed the locker, pressed his hand to the scanner, and listened to it lock. That part of his life was over. Again. It had to be. For 3 days, he returned to his routine. Moving crates. Checking inventory. Staying invisible. But it wasn't the same. People recognized him now. They moved out of his way, in corridors. They whispered when he passed. Some looked at him with respect. Others with fear. Nobody treated him like he was invisible anymore. On the 4th day, Salmon found him in the cargo bay during his lunch break. He was eating alone, as always. But now, it felt less like preference and more like isolation. Can I sit? She asked. He nodded without looking up. She sat across from him, her own tray of food untouched. You've been avoiding the medical bay. I'm not injured. I didn't say you were. But we have counselors. People trained to help with. She searched for the right words. With what you're dealing with. I've talked to counselors private. For 3 years after I left Ghost Company. They helped. Some. But this isn't something that can be fixed with talking. It's something I have to manage every day. Then let me help you manage it, Salmon said. That's what medical staff do. We help people manage their conditions. Jiwoo finally looked at her. Really looked at her. She was young. Maybe 23 or 24. Earnest. Kind. She genuinely wanted to help. Why? Because I saw you in that colony. I saw you with the colonists, leaving supplies, protecting us, and I saw you in the command center afterward, fighting to stay human while everyone around you only saw the weapon. You're not broken. Corporal, you're someone dealing with trauma while still trying to do the right thing. That deserves support. Something in Jiwoo's chest loosened slightly. Not much. But enough. I appreciate that, Private. Salmon. Call me Salmon. Salmon, he repeated. I'm Jiwoo. Not Corporal. Not Reaper. Just Jiwoo. She smiled. Okay. Just Jiwoo. Will you come to the medical bay? Once a week. Just to talk. No treatment. No evaluations. Just talking. He hesitated, then nodded. It was a small step. But it was a step. Lieutenant Daehyun approached him a week later in the supply office. Jiwoo looked up from his data pad. His face carefully neutral. I wanted to apologize, Daehyun said without preamble. You weren't wrong, Jiwoo replied. I am just a supply guy now. No, Daehyun shook his head. I was wrong. You're not just anything. You're someone who can do impossible things, but chooses to do simple things instead. That takes more strength than what I do. Flying is easy. Knowing when not to fly, when to be something else, that's hard. Jiwoo didn't know what to say to that. So, he just nodded. Apology? Accepted. Lieutenant. Daehyun. Just Daehyun. Then I'm just Jiwoo. They shook hands. It felt like a new beginning. Small, fragile, but real. A month passed. Then, 2. Gradually, the ship's crew stopped staring. They didn't forget what Jiwoo had done, but they learned to see both sides of him. The quiet supply corporal, who moved crates efficiently, and the dangerous operative who slept beneath that surface, hopefully, never needed again. One evening, Commander Mira found him in the observation deck. He stood at the window, watching stars stream past as the ship traveled through hyperspace. Captain Velrin wants to promote you, she said. Transfer you to tactical operations. Says your skills are wasted in Supply Corps. What did you tell him? Jiwoo asked. I told him that you're exactly where you need to be, and that wasting skills is sometimes necessary to save a soul. Jiwoo thought about it. Thought about the nightmares that still woke him up some nights. Thought about his weekly talks with Salmon that helped more than he wanted to admit. Thought about how hard he fought every day to keep Reaper locked away. To remember that killing efficiently wasn't the same as living meaningfully. Yeah, he said finally. You were right. Good. Mira smiled. Because you make a terrible tactical operative. You're much better at organizing my supply closets. It was a joke. A small one. But it made Jiwoo's lips twitch in what might have been the beginning of a smile. He was getting better at those. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. After a while, Mira left, but Jiwoo remained. He reached down and touched his ankle. Where his old knife was strapped, he'd started wearing it again, just in case. Just in case his people needed him. Just in case Reaper had to come out one more time. But he hoped it would stay in its sheath. Hoped he'd never have to become that person again. Hoped that Han Jiwoo could finally, truly, be just Jiwoo. A supply corporal who counted crates and lived a quiet life, and tried very hard to be human again. The crew called him Reaper once. They'd feared him, respected him, treated him like a living weapon. Now they called him Jiwoo. They ate meals with him, joked with him, treated him like a person. And that was the greatest victory of all. The war against the Vrath Empire continued. The eternal vigilance flew on, protecting the innocent, standing against tyranny. And in its cargo bay, a quiet man with kind eyes and terrible skills counted supply crates. Most days, that was enough. Some days, it had to be.